Have we been lied to about how Christianity began? We're exploring the secret Gospels that didn't make it into the Bible. The best known of these is the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the Gospels in the Bible, this doesn't have a setting and it doesn't have a storyline. It's just a collection of things that Jesus is supposed to have said. Thomas is all about secret knowledge that's only revealed to the chosen few. It's the secret sayings that Jesus is supposed to have taught Thomas, but not the rest of his followers. This kind of claim is typical of Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Peter. So when was the Gospel of Thomas written?
I see the Gospel of Thomas as a 2nd century work. It has to be before the end of the 2nd century because we actually have manuscripts of parts of it from around then. And I don't see it as being within 2 generations of the beginnings of Christianity. I think it comes from a later stage. It has dependence on Paul. So I would be happy with putting it in the middle of the 2nd century.
Does the Gospel of Thomas represent an earlier form of Christianity than the Gospels in the Bible?
I don't think there's any reason to think so, partly because the Gospel of Thomas seems to me to presuppose either the other Gospels or the kind of stories that we have in the other Gospels. As I say, they basically say, they attack Matthew, they attack Peter, they attack the other apostles, and that presupposes that these other apostles have already come on the scene, have already had their say, and are associated with a particular kind of version of Christianity, which the author of Thomas is then trying to offset in some way.
Most scholars today believe that the Gospel of Thomas was written in the 2nd century. The writer was familiar with several books that are in the Bible, but it isn't based on first-hand knowledge of Jesus. But some scholars claim that there could have been an earlier version of the Gospel of Thomas.
Well, John Dominic Crossan has made the case, and he's not alone, that an earlier form of the Gospel of Thomas, not the one we actually have, but an earlier and shorter form, could have been composed as early as the middle of the 1st century. And therefore it is just as old as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the 3 synoptic Gospels. But I and many other scholars have a problem with this. For one thing, it's special pleading. If you take evidence and the evidence doesn't support your theory, the evidence in fact says this was written in the 2nd century, how is it legitimate then to say, okay, I will rearrange the evidence, I will delete some of the sayings that are obviously 2nd century, and I will create a new form of the document, and I will declare that it is earlier, it dates back to the 1st century. Well, can't we all do that with everything? This is not the way historic scholarship proceeds. You work with the evidence you have, and you say, okay, here's where it fits, and you have various considerations. And this document fits in this particular time, maybe in this particular place, has these kinds of concerns in mind. And we don't then doctor the evidence, as it were, to make it fit a preferred theory so that we can end up, in this case, with a new gospel, an independent gospel that gives us a Jesus which, by the way, coincidentally happens to reflect contemporary values, circulating in today's universities. I'm very suspicious of that approach.
The claim that there was an earlier version of the Gospel of Thomas is another misleading claim that doesn't have any evidence to support it and involves ignoring the evidence that we do have. Next time, we'll look at who chose which Gospels to include in the Bible.